Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Mr. Rogues. In this video we spotlight underrated rogue, the Spot. It's been quite a while since I did one of these. For those who don't remember, or those who are new to the channel, Underrated Rogues is different from Forgotten Supervillains in that it spotlights characters who you can't really say are forgotten. These aren't super obscure villains, they have fan bases and appear fairly regularly at least, but they are perhaps not quite as appreciated as they should be, or they have perhaps not lived up to their full potential. Anyway, my idea going forward is for Underrated Rogues and Forgotten Supervillains to be the two main series of this channel. So, let's take a look at this video's poor underappreciated knave, the Spot. The Spot, real name Jonathan Owen, made his first appearance in a multi-part arc beginning in the spectacular Spider-Man 97, published in 1984. The story was written by Milgrom and penciled by Herb Trimpe. In it we meet Dr. Jonathan Owen, a scientist in the employ of Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin. Owen got the idea to artificially recreate the Dark Force powers of Cloak and Dagger fame, and turn himself into an all-powerful being. He later proposed his idea to his boss, who approved of it. Owen thus proceeded with his experiment. However, instead of harnessing the Dark Force powers, he accidentally opened up a black hole and was subsequently sucked into it. The scientist discovered that it wasn't actually a black hole, but a gateway to another dimension, a stark white dimension inhabited by floating black dots of unknown properties. Desiring to escape the strange place, Owen navigated himself towards what he believed to be the exit, a larger black spot, similar to the hole he'd entered through. It was an exit alright, and the scientist found himself back in his laboratory. However, he wasn't quite the same. While passing through the black hole, Jonathan bonded with its odd properties. His skin was bleached snow white, and he was covered in black dots. These dots weren't just cosmetic, however, as each of them served as portals and were all interlinked with one another. Owen also realized that he could remove the dots from his body and place them anywhere, even suspend them in the air, and by doing so he could enter through one and come out another. The scientist was thus capable of teleportation, essentially. Jonathan decided to withhold all of this information from his employer, as he first wanted to test his newfound powers by tangling with one of Kingpin's enemies. When Spider-Man then came charging their base, Owen saw his opportunity. Calling himself the Spot, the brazen scientist managed to fend off the pesky wall-crawler by clever usage of his portable portals. It was impossible for Spidey to even land a single blow on the Spot, as his body was riddled in holes like Swiss cheese, and he kept appearing and disappearing through his dots. Encouraged by this victory, Owen decided to use these powers for his own gain and become a supervillain, as opposed to being a flunky of the Kingpin's. His ambitions were crushed during his second encounter with Spider-Man, however, as he faced humiliating defeat. Owen realized that the supervillain game wasn't for him, and the one-time rogue thus retired. We never saw the Spot again. That is, until 1997, when the Polka Dot Fiend finally returned for a two-parter published across Spectacular 245 and 246. This time the Spot is, despite everything, up to no good as a supervillain. A failed supervillain. Spot decides to band together with a group of other lesser foes of Spider-Man, the Grizzly, the Kangaroo, and Gibbon. Together these four plan to crush their hated nemesis once and for all, calling themselves the Spider-Man Revenge Squad, although they actually became more known as the Legion of Losers. The gang miserably failed in their endeavor, of course. While the first story from 1984 portrayed the Spot as an amateur supervillain in way over his head, this story not only depicts Johnny as a giant loser, but also as a total idiot. At one point, he has to be reminded that he can use his portals to travel, and doesn't need to drive around in a car. Wasn't this guy supposed to be a smart scientist? This comic set the trend for the Spot's subsequent appearances, as he now began to show up more often, but as a complete joke of a character. In 2002, Spot even died at the hands of Tombstone. The story was published across 2 issues of Spider-Man's Tangled Web, and featured Johnny Owen as Tombstone's cellmate in prison. Here, the character is depicted as a cowardly weakling who's forced to help Tombstone escape. He's later thanked on the outside by getting his neck snapped. For some reason, the Spot's costume is orange here, perhaps to evoke the spots of a leopard, and certainly to make the poor loser look sillier. Despite dying, the Spot continued to show up in Spider-Man comics, as well as other Marvel titles in the following years. Not even death could stop the ridicule. The Spot was now the de facto loser villain in the Spidey Rogues Gallery. Spider-Man's killer moth, in other words. In 2007, we got the miniseries supervillain team-up MODOK's 11. In this tale, MODOK gathers up a bunch of rogues for one last heist, and the Spot is, oddly enough, among them. Being portrayed as a weak loser and a moron was apparently not enough, as in this story Johnny also turned out to be a double-crossing douchebag, betraying his team to the Mandarin. The Spot now definitely scraped the bottom of the barrel of the Marvel Rogues Gallery, a truly pathetic villain. However, with the Amazing Spider-Man 589, published in 2009, came the day when someone finally realized the character's potential. A writer who understood that the Spot doesn't really need to be a stupid loser. This writer was Fred Van Lente, and together with artist Paulo Siqueira, he gave us a story simply titled Marked. In it, Spider-Man is tracking down a Russian gangster, only to find that someone else is also after his prey, namely the Spot. It's not about some typical criminal dispute or a quest for money, however. It's a mission of vengeance. It turns out that the gangster accidentally shot On's son during a drive-by, and the kid is now in the hospital in critical condition. Johnny wants revenge, and he's not going to let anyone stand in his way, including Spider-Man. This story was the first to portray the Spot as a serious threat, and to use his powers to their full potential. Here we get to see Johnny take out all the gangster's men like a real pro assassin, showing up out of nowhere, snapping necks unnoticed. He also gives old Webhead a run for his money. One interesting thing too is that the Spot never speaks in this story, which I think really goes with his physical appearance, makes him seem more alien. And yeah, it established that he has a family, a son and a wife from his previous life before becoming the Spot. Sadly enough though, this great story made zero impact, as next time Spot's face returned, he was the old usual incompetent loser. He's appeared quite a bit since then, and his latest appearance as of the making of this video was in the Sinister Six Reborn arc earlier this year. Here he's portrayed as one of the members of the latest incarnation of the classic Spidey villain team, the Sinister Six. I haven't read this story, but I can only assume that Spot is the goofy comic relief of the team. Of course, if that's not true, then let me know in the comments. As for other media, the Spot did get his very own episode titled The Spot on Spider-Man the Animated Series in the mid-90s. This took place when the character had yet only made one appearance in the comics. On this cartoon, Jonathan On is portrayed as a scientist working for Stark Industries. He's then fired and shortly afterwards picked up by the Kingpin. Just like in the comics, On becomes one of Kingpin's head researchers, who then discovers a portal into another dimension. Cloak is not involved here though. On is then transformed into the Spot, but unlike the comics, he actually proves to be a successful supervillain, albeit briefly. In the end, Spot ends up helping Spidey and then sacrificing himself to stop a giant black hole accidentally caused by his powers. This cartoon introduced a new aspect to the character too, namely a love interest, his assistant in Kingpin's lab. She's the real motivation behind his actions, as Johnny wishes to run off with her and escape the Kingpin's grasp. A very interesting thing of note is that the character is not in any way portrayed as a dim-witted loser in the episode. He was voiced by Oliver Muirhead. The Spot has also appeared in one episode of the current Disney Spider-Man cartoon, Spider-Man, where he was voiced by Crispin Freeman. I had never heard of this character until quite recently, despite the fact that I used to watch the animated series as a kid in the 90s. I guess I must have missed the Spot episode. Anyway, I found out about him when watching Super Sam's video on the Grizzly. Sam naturally mentioned the Legion of Losers story, and thus briefly referenced the Spot. His unique visual design immediately caught my eye, and I just had to find out more about this character. Having read many of his stories now, I knew he'd be perfect for the return of underrated rogues. So, the character of the Spot was obviously created from the get-go to be a sort of loser villain. He wasn't a moron or a coward, but clearly the guy was supposed to be sort of tongue-in-cheek, and not a real serious threat like Green Goblin or Doc Ock. He was a wannabe supervillain who had no idea what he was getting himself into. Taking all that into consideration, my question is, why the hell then did they make the guy so awesome? If they wanted him to be a goofball, why give him such an awesome design? Why give him such awesome powers? I mean, the guy can teleport anywhere, and he can even enter his own dimension, the polka dot dimension, or whatever. What kind of loser villain has his own dimension? It seems to me that Milgrom and Herb Trimpe had a really cool character on their hands here, without apparently realizing it. Instead of using what they had, they just made fun of it. And then of course, when the character returned, it all just got worse. The Spot was at least an actual character in the 80s. Later he became a walking joke, or teleporting joke. I just can't see it. I just can't see why so many writers think the Spot is corny. Seriously, what is so corny about him? To me, the guy is basically like the cool version of the Polka Dot Man. Interestingly enough, that character also had pretty awesome powers, but what really brought him down was the design. He looks ridiculous. The name Polka Dot Man is also really dumb. And I guess I can admit that. The name Spot is kinda stupid too. Like Spidey himself says in the first story, Spot is what you'd name your dog. Is it the worst supervillain name in existence? No, I definitely wouldn't say that, but it ain't too great either. Still, the name isn't enough to explain the ridicule Johnny has had to endure. I mean, in my opinion, Green Goblin is a pretty dumb name too. Apparently though, the creators of Spider-Man the Animated Series did not agree with the comic creators, as they portrayed Spot as just another rogue, not a laughingstock. Besides the Mark story, I would say that the Taz version of Spot is without a doubt the best. We've got a pretty similar situation to Mr. Freeze and Mad Hatter here. The villain kinda sucks in the comics, but is so much better in a 90s animated show. On the show, Spot was not only a competent crook, but he was also a more sympathetic and compelling character. He's not really evil, and only wants cash so that he can escape the Kingpin with the woman he loves. Unlike the comics, he doesn't really want to be a villain. And let's not forget the fact that he sacrificed himself in the end to save New York. I can't see comic Spot doing that. For some damn reason though, these animated appearances never seem to impact the comics. Freeze, the Hatter, and Spot continued to suck post-animated shows. It was in fact after Taz that Spot really became a joke, as it was then he was brought back following a long absence, only to be made fun of. None of this really make any sense to me. I'm not the only one who likes Spot neither, as in later years the character seems to have grown a sort of cult following. He's got a fairly big fanbase of people who wishes the guy got more respect, with Spot appreciation threads floating around the net. This makes me happy, as it means I haven't gone insane in liking this guy so damn much. On one of these threads, I also saw some poster recommend a name change to Portal. I'd be all for that. Portal, or maybe Portal Man, is way better than the Spot. Again, not that the Spot is the worst name ever. After such a long history of abuse though, I doubt a name change would be enough to save old Johnny Owen's reputation. So there you have it. That is the story of underrated rogue, the Spot. What do you think about this rogue? Do you agree with me that he's actually really cool? Or do you agree with the majority that he's a silly goofball? Let me know in the comments. And thanks Super Sam for introducing me to this character. Next up in this series will be a villain who's been requested by a lot of people lately, namely Superman's the Prankster. So stay tuned for that. And as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.